I knew it was a bad idea the moment Caleb suggested it. Cutting through the reservation wasn't just a shortcut. It was a gamble. We'd been on the road for hours, driving my beat-up old car from Fort Worth, trying to make it to Palm Springs before sunrise. It was already past midnight, and the desert stretched out before us like an endless black sea, the horizon barely visible in the weak light from the sliver of a moon hanging above us. I should have listened to Caleb. I should have stuck to the main highways, kept to the well-lit roads. But the thought of shaving off a couple of hours, of finally getting to Grandma and Grandpa's place and crashing in a real bed, was too tempting. So, when the turnoff came, I took it. Caleb was dozing in the passenger seat, his head lolling against the window, the steady hum of the engine lulling him to sleep. The car had been running surprisingly well for the first part of the trip, but now, as we bumped along the narrow, cracked road through the reservation, it started to make that familiar whining noise, a low, guttural sound that sent a chill down my spine. The reservation was dark. No streetlights, no signs of life. Just the road ahead, the jagged silhouettes of distant mountains, and the oppressive weight of the desert night pressing in on us. I kept my eyes on the road, hands gripping the wheel a little too tight, trying to ignore the creeping unease that was gnawing at the back of my mind. Then I saw them. 3 figures, walking along the side of the road, barely visible in the dim light. They were moving slowly, hobbling, like they were hurt or lost. I slowed down, squinting through the windshield to get a better look. As we got closer, I realized they were old, really old, hunched over with age, their clothes hanging off them like rags. "Hey, Caleb," I nudged him, trying to keep my voice steady. "Wake up, man." He stirred, blinking groggily at me before looking out the window. "What's up?" "Check it out." I nodded toward the figures. "There are some old people walking on the road. Maybe we should see if they need help." Caleb frowned, leaning forward to get a better look. "What the hell are they doing out here?" "I don't know," I muttered, slowing the car to a crawl as we approached them. "But we can't just leave them out here, they could be in trouble." I pulled up alongside them, rolling down the window. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" The 3 figures didn't respond. They just kept walking, their movements stiff and unnatural, like their joints were rusted shut. As we got closer, I realized they were women. 3 old women, their faces hidden in the shadows of tattered shawls wrapped around their heads. I called out again, a little louder this time. "Do you need a ride? We can take you somewhere safe." Still nothing. They just kept walking, their heads bowed, their feet shuffling against the cracked asphalt. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. Something wasn't right. "Ethan," Caleb's voice was tight, his eyes locked on the women. "Get back in the car. Let's go." But I hesitated. Something about the way they moved, the way they ignored us, felt wrong. I opened my mouth to call out again when the women suddenly stopped, all at once, as if they were one entity. They stood there for a moment, perfectly still, before turning around in unison to face us. My breath caught in my throat. Their eyes, oh God, their eyes were glowing. Pale, milky white specks of light, like dying stars, flickered in the darkness where their eyes should have been. And then one of them, the one in the middle, took a step toward the car, her head tilting at an unnatural angle. "Maybe you and your brother can help us after all," she said, her voice low and distorted, like it was coming from somewhere deep within her. From somewhere far away, panic surged through me, and I slammed my foot on the gas, the tires screeching as the car lurched forward. The women didn't move. They just stood there, watching us as we sped away, their eyes glowing brighter, like tiny white-hot coals in the darkness. "Holy shit," Caleb whispered, his face pale as he clutched the seat. "What the hell was that?" "I don't know," I gasped, my heart pounding in my chest. "But we're getting out of here. Now." I drove like a madman, the car rattling and whining as we tore down the road, the darkness swallowing us whole, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those women chasing after us. But there was nothing, just the empty road stretching out behind us. Then, just as I started to calm down, the headlights caught movement on the side of the road. Something was running alongside the car, keeping pace with us. I squinted, trying to make it out, but whatever it was fast. Too fast. Ethan. Caleb's voice was shaking, his eyes wide with fear. There's something out there. I didn't need to look again. I could feel it. Something was out there. Something was following us. I pressed the gas pedal harder, but the car was already struggling, the engine whining in protest. The thing outside, whatever it was getting closer. And then I saw them. Deformed, twisted shapes darting through the darkness just beyond the reach of the headlights. Coyotes, or at least they looked like coyotes. But they weren't right. Their bodies were too long, their legs too thin, their eyes glowing with that same milky white light. They weren't just following us. They were hunting us. I clenched the wheel, my knuckles white as I pushed the car to its limit. The engine roared, but the coyotes kept pace, their twisted forms barely visible in the dark. And then, one of them darted in front of the car, its eyes locking with mine through the windshield. I swerved, the tires screeching as the car veered off the road, bouncing over rocks and dirt. Caleb shouted something, but I couldn't hear him over the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. The car hit something hard, and we were thrown forward as it came to a grinding halt. "Shit! Shit! Shit!" I shouted, trying to restart the engine, but the car was dead, the dashboard lights flickering before going dark. We were stranded. "Ethan," Caleb whispered, his voice trembling. "What do we do?" I didn't have an answer. I just stared out the windshield, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps as the coyotes circled the car, their bodies twisting and contorting in ways that defied nature. Their eyes, those horrible glowing eyes, were fixed on us, their mouths hanging open in silent snarls. And then, from the darkness, I saw them. The old women. They were walking toward us, their movements slow and deliberate, their eyes glowing with that same unnatural light. They weren't human. No, they were something else. Something ancient and evil. Skinwalkers. "We need to run," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "We need to get out of here." Caleb nodded, his face pale with fear. We grabbed our phones, our bags, anything we could carry, and threw open the car doors, sprinting into the desert night. The wind howled around us, the darkness pressing in from all sides, but we didn't stop. We couldn't stop. The coyotes were behind us, their snarls growing louder, closer, as we ran. I could hear the old women too, their distorted voices echoing through the night, calling out to us, taunting us. "Ethan, Caleb, you can't run forever." My legs burned, my lungs screamed for air, but I pushed myself harder, adrenaline coursing through my veins. We had to get away, we had to find help. But the desert was endless, a black void stretching out in all directions. There was no one out here, no lights, no signs of civilization. Just the cold, unrelenting darkness and the creatures that hunted us. Caleb stumbled, falling to the ground with a cry of pain. I skidded to a stop, reaching out to grab him to pull him back to his feet. But before I could, they were on us. The coyotes lunged from the darkness, their bodies twisting and contorting into monstrous shapes, their mouths snapping at us with teeth too long, too sharp. I swung my arm, trying to fend them off, but they were too strong, too fast. Caleb screamed, a sound that pierced through the night, and I felt a white-hot pain in my leg as one of the creatures sank its teeth into my flesh. I kicked out, trying to shake it off, but it held on, dragging me to the ground. The old women were closer now, their faces twisted into malevolent grins. I could see their eyes glowing brighter as they watched us struggle, feeding off our fear, off our pain. I thought it was the end. I was sure of it. But then, out of nowhere, a blinding light flooded the desert, and the sound of sirens cut through the night. The coyotes yelped, their forms dissolving into shadows as they fled, and the old women hissed, their eyes narrowing before they turned and vanished into the darkness. I blinked, disoriented, as the headlights of a truck approached, and a group of men in uniforms rushed toward us. Reservation police. They pulled us to our feet, their faces grim, their eyes scanning the darkness as if expecting the creatures to return. "What the hell was that?" Caleb gasped, clutching his side, his voice shaking with terror. "Don't talk," one of the officers snapped, his voice low and urgent. "You didn't see anything. You didn't hear anything. You understand?" I nodded numbly, too stunned to argue. They helped us into the truck, bandaging our wounds as best they could before speeding away from the scene. As we drove, one of the older officers glanced back at us, his eyes hard. "Whatever you think you saw, you didn't. No one outside the res will believe you, and it's better that way. You're lucky we found you when we did." I swallowed hard, nodding again. The pain in my leg was excruciating, but the fear... God, the fear was worse. The realization that we had come face to face with something beyond understanding, something that wasn't supposed to exist, gnawed at me. We didn't speak for the rest of the ride. Caleb sat beside me, his face pale, his hands trembling. I could see the same fear in his eyes that I felt in my own. When we finally reached safety, the officers dropped us off at a small clinic on the edge of the reservation. They gave us one last warning before leaving. "Forget what happened tonight. Don't come back here. This place isn't for you." And with that, they were gone, leaving us alone in the sterile white room, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. I looked at Caleb, and he looked back at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What the hell just happened?" he whispered. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that we were alive, but barely. And whatever those things were, those old women, those creatures, they weren't done with us. Not by a long shot. We never spoke about that night again. We made it to Palm Springs the next day, but the trip was different. We were different. The fear stayed with us, a shadow that followed us long after the desert was behind us. Because I knew deep down that the reservation wasn't just a shortcut. It was a warning. And if we ever dared to return, we might not be so lucky next time.